June 23rd, 1986. Late morning. A farm field in northwestern Indiana, just outside the town of Enos. A farmer plowing his land stops the tractor. Something is wrong with the dirt. He climbs down. He walks over. Two bodies are buried there, shallow enough that the plow has already clipped one of them. Both men are in their undershorts. Both have been beaten so badly that the faces are almost unrecognizable. Dental records will confirm who they are. The older one is 48, the younger one is 41. They are brothers, and they have been dead for 9 days. Tony Spilotro wasn't just another Chicago muscle guy with a gun. He was the enforcer, sent to protect the greatest financial scheme in the history of American organized crime. He had been accused of 22 murders and convicted of exactly none. He had beaten every charge, every indictment, every grand jury for 15 years, using a combination of intimidation, legal skill, and the particular ruthlessness that makes men like him almost impossible to touch. He was the iron fist wrapped around a gold mine, and the gold mine was Las Vegas. Here's what gets me about this story every single time I come back to it. The Chicago outfit didn't need guns to steal $50 million from Las Vegas. They used scales, adjustable ones. They used coin cabinets bolted to casino walls. They used a frontman who played golf and asked no questions. This was the most sophisticated financial crime in mob history, hidden inside a legal casino operation, right in front of regulators and auditors and the state of Nevada for years. No bank was robbed. No vault was cracked. The money was just made to disappear before anyone counted it. That's insane. And it really happened. But here's what makes this story genuinely insane. Before Tony Spilotro became the most feared name on the Las Vegas Strip, he was a skinny kid, growing up above his father Patsy's restaurant on the west side of Chicago. Before that, a teenager who had been arrested 13 times before his 21st birthday. Before that, a boy who watched his father suffer a stroke and die, who dropped out of high school at 15 and walked straight into the orbit of a man named Sam DiStefano, an outfit enforcer so deranged and so brutal that even people who killed people for a living were frightened of him. That apprenticeship was where the ant was forged. This is the story of how the Chicago outfit engineered the greatest casino theft in American history, and how they did it by owning the house. How they funneled untaxed millions through 4 Las Vegas casinos, through Kansas City, through couriers carrying cash in bags, to bosses in Chicago who never set foot in Nevada. How Tony Spilotro enforced the streets while the machine ran clean above him. And how, in the end, the machine decided the man protecting it had become more dangerous than useful. But here's the question this story keeps raising. The bosses in Chicago knew exactly what Tony was doing out there. They knew about the side businesses, the chaos, the heat he was drawing. They let it go for years. So why, in June of 1986, right at the exact moment the whole operation was already collapsing from a federal prosecution, did they decide to finally clean house? What does it tell you about an organization when it murders its own enforcer, not because he failed, but because he became inconvenient? Sit with that. Now let's go back. Because to understand what Spilotro was protecting, you have to understand what the Chicago outfit had built in Las Vegas, and how they built it without a single one of their names on a single piece of paper. Tony Accardo, the man who ran Chicago for decades under various official titles and no title at all, understood one thing about Las Vegas that nobody else in organized crime had fully grasped. Las Vegas wasn't a city. It was a machine that converted American cash into untraceable income. The slot machines, the table games, the constant river of tourists handing over their savings with a smile. The problem for the mob had always been the same one. How do you get that money out without leaving a trace? Tony Spilotro had been in Chicago's orbit since his mid-teens. He ran errands for DiStefano at 16. He was collecting debts at 18. By 1962, at 24 years old, he was involved in what federal investigators would later call the M&M murders. The torture killings of two small time thieves who had made the catastrophic mistake of robbing in a Chicago suburb, the outfit considered off-limits. The details of what happened to those two men were so extreme that they became legend in outfit circles. One victim had a vice applied to his skull until his eye came out of the socket. Spilotro was in that room. He learned what violence was for in that basement. It wasn't rage. It was a message. Delivered precisely. Think about that for a second. This is a man in his mid-20s. Most kids that age are figuring out their first jobs and their first apartments. This kid is becoming one of the most technically proficient killers in the American underworld. That's not background. That's the whole story in miniature. By the early 1970s, Joey Aiuppa had taken over as boss of the Chicago outfit. Aiuppa was old school, methodical, and deeply interested in maximizing what Las Vegas could produce. The outfit already had its fingers in 4 strip and downtown properties through various arrangements. But the real opportunity came when a company called Recreon Corporation was forced to sell the Stardust Hotel. The feds and the Nevada Gaming Commission were already asking uncomfortable questions about where the Stardust's money was actually going. Recreon needed an exit. Aiuppa needed a face. That face belonged to Allen Glick. He was 32 years old, clean-cut, presentable, a young businessman out of San Diego who already owned the Hacienda Hotel. Glick wanted to get bigger. He just didn't have the money. What happened next could only happen in America. Over a series of phone calls from very friendly men in Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland, nearly $146 million in Teamsters Central States Pension Fund loans materialized. Nick Savella, the Kansas City mob boss, had a direct line to the Teamsters official who controlled the fund. The money flowed. Glick bought the Stardust and 3 other casinos under the name Argent Corporation, which stood for Allen R. Glick Enterprises, and he became one of the most powerful casino men in Las Vegas. He played golf in La Costa. He asked no questions. On his first day as the new president of Argent Corporation, Glick hired Frank Lefty Rosenthal to run things. The salary was $250,000 a year. Rosenthal was a Chicago outfit associate and one of the most gifted sports bookmakers alive, a man who could read odds the way other people read weather. He had one problem. The Nevada Gaming Commission refused to license him. So Rosenthal changed his job title. He went from general manager to poker room coordinator, then to entertainment director, then to assistant marketing manager, then to the host of a nightly television program broadcasting from the casino floor. The Gaming Commission kept saying no. Rosenthal kept showing up anyway. And the entire time, he was running all 4 casinos with total authority, just without the title. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because Rosenthal needed to solve the fundamental problem that had always plagued the operation. How do you remove millions in cash from a casino counting room when every dollar is supposed to be weighed, recorded, and taxed? The answer came from a slot machine supervisor at the downtown Fremont Hotel named J. Vandermark. He was the architect. This is how it worked. Step 1. The opportunity. The 4 Argent casinos were doing enormous business through their slot machines, pulling in coins around the clock. All that metal had to be counted. The problem was that you couldn't count 1,000,000 quarters individually. So casinos used industrial scales. Weigh the coins, convert by denomination, record the total. That's the system. That's also the whole. Step 2. The inside connection. Vandermark ran the slot operations. He had total access to the counting room equipment, specifically the scales. He brought in a mechanic who recalibrated those scales to read 10% light, put in $1,000 in quarters, and the scale reports $900 every single day at every Argent property. Step 3. The execution. Coin bags from all 4 casinos were trucked to the Stardust Central Hard Count Room. The bags were opened and poured into hoppers over those adjusted scales. The official count was recorded, but the number was wrong, systematically, deliberately, every shift. The missing 10% was then converted through a network of locked coin cabinets placed around the Stardust Casino floor. Change girls would deposit customer bills into these cabinets and take out rolls of coins. Completely normal behavior, observed by cameras, apparently above board. But those cabinets were emptied nightly of their paper cash, and that cash went somewhere the cameras never saw. Step 4. The money. Court testimony later confirmed the operation was generating $15 million a year in untaxed cash for the Chicago outfit for 5 years. That is $75 million that never appeared on any tax return, never went through any bank, never left a single paper trace. Step 5. The problem. That problem was named J. Vandermark. In the summer of 1976, Nevada investigators started asking questions about the Stardust's slot department. Vandermark disappeared. He was last seen in Phoenix, Arizona. Reports filtered back that he had gone to Mazatlan, Mexico for a vacation. He was never seen again. Some accounts vary on the precise details, but what is documented is this. A man who knew exactly how the entire slot skim was engineered vanished without a body, without a trace. Right at the moment, he became a liability. Loose ends in this business don't stay loose. Here's what you have to understand about what the outfit had built at this point. This was not a criminal enterprise hiding in the shadows. It was operating in broad daylight, inside 4 licensed casinos, reviewed by state regulators, audited by accountants, observed by security cameras. And it was stealing millions every single year, and nobody could see it, because the theft happened before the counting. If the money was never recorded, it was never there. You cannot steal what does not officially exist. To protect all of this, Chicago sent Tony Spilotro to Las Vegas in 1971, at 33 years old, replacing a previous enforcer who had gotten himself placed in Nevada's Black Book of Banned Individuals. Spilotro arrived and did something clever. He covered his presence behind a legitimate business front. For a time, he was listed as an employee at a gift shop at Circus, going by the name Tony Stewart. When he moved operations to the Stardust, he went back to his real name, because by then, everyone already knew who he was. His job was simple. Keep the skim running, keep Rosenthal protected, and make sure nobody in Las Vegas had the courage to ask inconvenient questions. He opened a pawn shop called the Gold Rush on West Sahara Avenue to fence stolen goods, because $15 million a year apparently wasn't enough. The man was incapable of sitting still. And that compulsion to stay busy, to stay visible, to keep building his own empire inside the outfit's empire, was the thing that eventually destroyed everything. Remember Tamara Rand. She's going to matter. On November 9th, 1975, a 55-year-old San Diego businesswoman named Tamara Rand was shot 5 times in the head with a .22 caliber pistol in the kitchen of her home. Rand had loaned Allen Glick money in the early stages of the Argent deal and believed she was entitled to a share of the casinos. She had made the mistake of pressing that claim loudly, publicly, and in writing. The .22 caliber was Tony Spilotro's weapon of choice. He was never charged. Rand's murder was never officially solved. Stay with me here, because this is where the whole architecture starts cracking. In 1977, the FBI launched Operation Strawman. They had an informant, they had a tip, and they had a specific question. How was Kansas City mob money moving in and out of Las Vegas casinos? They started planting bugs. They placed microphones in a Kansas City restaurant. They listened, and what they heard exceeded anything they had expected. Angelo the Hook LaPietra from Chicago was caught on tape discussing skim profits. Carl DeLuna and Nick Savella of Kansas City were recorded working through the logistics of how cash was delivered from Las Vegas to the Midwest families who each received their cut. On November 26, 1978, FBI agents recorded a meeting at a Kansas City residence where mob figures discussed the skim operation in detail, unaware that every word was going straight to federal prosecutors. What none of them said on tape was that the system was already straining. Because Tony Spilotro was becoming a problem, the man sent to Las Vegas to be invisible had become the most visible mobster in America. He was indicted, tried, and acquitted twice in the 1970s. In 1978, Nevada put his name in the state's black book, meaning he was legally banned from entering any casino property. The FBI and Las Vegas Metro Police were watching him constantly. Then, in 1979, he called his old Chicago friend, Frank Culotta, out to Las Vegas to help him run a burglary crew. Culotta was smart, capable, and willing. And Spilotro's new hobby became robbing high-end homes, businesses, and even hotel properties across the Strip. They called themselves the Hole-in-the-Wall Gang because of their preferred entry method, cutting through walls to bypass locked doors. Here's what I keep coming back to about this. The outfit had a $75 million financial operation running cleanly under the radar, and the man they trusted to protect it was drilling holes through walls at night to steal furs and jewelry and silver. Those two things are incompatible. One requires absolute discretion. The other is practically an advertisement. July 4th, 1981, Independence Day. 6 members of the Hole-in-the-Wall Gang attempt to burglarize Bertha's Gifts and Home Furnishings on East Sahara Avenue. The FBI had an informant inside the crew named Sal Romano. Metro Police and federal agents were waiting. The bust was clean, 6 arrests, and one of those 6 was Frank Culotta. Faced with serious time, Culotta made the calculation that most men in that position eventually make. He became a government witness. He didn't just give up the burglary crew. He gave up Tony Spilotro. He named him in the M&M murders from 1962. He described the operation, the crew, the structure. By October 4th, 1982, the situation had deteriorated so completely that someone planted a bomb under the driver's seat of Frank Rosenthal's 1981 Cadillac outside a Tony Roma's restaurant on Sahara Avenue. Rosenthal started the car. The bomb detonated. A metal plate welded under the driver's seat absorbed most of the blast. Rosenthal walked away. The bomber was never identified, but suspicion fell in multiple directions, including at Spilotro himself. The man sent to protect the operation was now suspected of trying to murder the man running it. Accounts vary on who ordered that bombing, but the documented fact is this: Rosenthal survived, and the relationship between Las Vegas and Chicago had become poisoned. In January 1983, Spilotro was indicted for the M&M murders. That same year, federal prosecutors used the recordings from Operation Strawman to seek indictments against mob leadership across 4 states: Chicago, Kansas City, Milwaukee, and Cleveland. The walls were closing in from every direction. September 1985. A federal courtroom in Kansas City. The trial that prosecutors had been building for 8 years finally begins. The defendants included Joey Aiuppa, 77 years old, described by the government as the head of the Chicago outfit. Next to him, Joseph Lombardo, at 57, known in the streets as Joey the Clown, consigliere to the outfit. Alongside them, figures from Kansas City, Milwaukee, and Cleveland. The charges: conspiracy to skim more than $2 million from 4 Argent Corporation casinos. The tapes played for the jury were devastating. The FBI had recorded mob bosses across 4 states discussing their cut of the Las Vegas money in terms so specific and so comfortable that they sounded like business partners reviewing quarterly earnings, because that's exactly what they were. January 21st, 1986. The jury returns. Aiuppa is guilty. Lombardo is guilty. 5 mob bosses convicted in a single verdict. On March 27, 1986, Joey Aiuppa stands in front of a federal judge and receives a sentence of 28.5 years in prison and a fine of $143,000. He was 78 years old. He would die in federal custody years later. 22 days after Aiuppa's sentencing, on June 14, 1986, Tony Spilotro and his younger brother Michael left Michael's home in Oak Park, Illinois, for what they were told was a meeting with outfit leadership. Tony had reportedly been told he was being promoted, elevated, that his time in Las Vegas, difficult as it had become, had earned him a higher position. He walked toward that meeting thinking about the future. He never came home. Neither did Michael. What investigators pieced together later was that both brothers were brought to a basement in a house near O'Hare International Airport in Bensonville, Illinois. There, multiple outfit members beat them to death with their hands and feet. Not guns, not a quick professional execution. Fists, boots, sustained and personal. Both men were stripped to their undershirts. Then they were driven to Indiana and buried in a cornfield in the dark. 9 days later, a farmer found them. Investigators recovered dental records confirming the identities. Time of death estimated as June 14th, 1986. The indictment that eventually came 21 years later listed the Spilotro murders among 17 killings attributed to outfit leadership. Court records confirmed that James Marcello, a senior figure in the Chicago outfit, ordered and organized the hit. Here's the thing about how this ends. Tony Spilotro spent 15 years in Las Vegas, evading every prosecution, beating every case, walking away from every charge. The FBI couldn't touch him. Nevada couldn't touch him. And the organization that ultimately destroyed him wasn't the government. It was his own bosses, the same men who sent him there, the same men he'd been protecting all that time. What happened after was a reckoning that remade the landscape. Frank Rosenthal left Las Vegas permanently in the mid-1980s and settled in Florida, running a sports consulting business. He died in October of 2008 in Miami Beach, having lived out the kind of quiet retirement that almost nobody from that world manages to find. He never cooperated with the government. He never testified against anyone. Allen Glick testified against the mob at the Strawman trial, describing in detail how he had been controlled, threatened, and used as a financial puppet. A jury watched him explain how he had been called to meetings with Kansas City mob boss Nick Savella, who made clear in precise and quiet language what would happen to Glick's family if he stopped cooperating. Glick eventually surrendered his gaming licenses, sold the Argent properties, and returned to San Diego. He died of cancer in August of 2021 at the age of 79. Frank Collada entered witness protection after his cooperation. He spent years as one of the government's most valuable witnesses against the outfit, testifying in multiple trials. He later left protection, wrote a memoir, and became a tour guide in Las Vegas, taking tourists to the sites where the stories he lived had actually happened. He died of COVID complications in August of 2020 at 81 years old. The most interesting fact about Frank Collada's later life is that he became famous for explaining mob history to civilians, which is about as perfect an ending as this genre allows. James Marcello, convicted in 2007 in the family secrets trials for the Spilotro murders and other crimes, received a life sentence. The family secrets case used testimony from Collada and other former outfit members to convict leadership on murders dating back decades. It was the most significant dismantling of Chicago outfit power in the organization's history. Here's what I keep coming back to with this story. The Chicago outfit spent 15 years building something genuinely extraordinary. Not extraordinary in a way to admire, but extraordinary in its engineering. They infiltrated a regulated industry. They corrupted the counting room. They turned government audits into window dressing. And they did it not with violence, but with accounting, with scales, with coin cabinets, with a golf-playing frontman who flew home to San Diego when things got complicated. The violence was always there, underneath. Tamara Rand shot in her kitchen. Jay Vandermark sunbathing on a Mexican beach, never coming back. But the money moved because the system was elegant. And that's not just this story. That's the Chicago outfit's entire philosophy. Other families used brute force. Chicago used structure. They understood that the most durable crimes don't look like crimes. They look like businesses. The Skim worked for as long as it did because it respected the rules it was breaking. And the moment their own enforcers stopped respecting that discipline, started drawing attention, started embarrassing them, the structure turned on him the same way it turned on everyone else. A cornfield in Indiana, 6 feet under. In their undershirts. That's where the whole thing ended. Not with a verdict, or a raid, or a government press conference. With 2 brothers and a farmer's plow, and a story that nobody was supposed to know. You're standing in front of the old Stardust site now, and there's nothing there. The building was demolished in 2007. The sign is in a museum. But if you stand on that stretch of Las Vegas Boulevard and you know what happened there, you see something different. You see a counting room where scales were rigged to lie. You see coin cabinets on the walls where the real money moved. You see $15 million a year in cash vanishing into the air, year after year, while a man in a double-breasted suit sat in a poker room without a poker room coordinator's license and ran the whole thing. And you think about how long it lasted, and how it ended, and who paid the price. If this story got under your skin, do me a favor and subscribe. New mob documentary every week on Mafia Vault. And I genuinely want your take on this one. Drop it in the comments. The Skim lasted almost a decade before the FBI cracked it. Given what they had access to, why did it take so long? Was the FBI outmatched? Or was the system more compromised than we've ever been told? Let's talk about it.